Pick up any battery. Look at the label. What do you see? Voltage, capacity, maybe a brand name. A recycling symbol. Some safety warnings, but here's what you don't see. The information that would actually help you understand whether the battery is good, failing, or worth keeping. And that omission isn't an accident, because if you knew how to rate a battery's actual condition, you'd realize how often dead batteries aren't dead at all. You'd know when a battery can be restored versus when it genuinely needs replacement. You'd make better decisions, and that would cost manufacturers money. Let me show you what I mean. At the recycling facility, we'd receive entire pallets of backup power units, the kind offices use to keep computers running during outages. These units cost anywhere from $100 to several $100 new. They'd arrive with tags. Battery failure. No longer holds charge. Most people would look at that and think, okay, the battery's done. Time to scrap it. But we'd test them, and the results were surprising. Some batteries were genuinely dead. The cells had degraded beyond recovery. Those went to proper recycling. But others? They just needed reconditioning. The cells were fine, they just entered a dormant state from sitting unused for too long. A few charge cycles later, they worked perfectly. And a third category was even more interesting, batteries that had 1 or 2 failed cells. But the rest were completely healthy. Most people see a battery pack as one unit. It either works or it doesn't, but that's not how batteries are built. Most rechargeable battery packs, whether in laptops, power tools, or backup units, contain multiple cells wired together. If one cell fails, it can drag down the performance of the entire pack. Even though the other cells are fine, replace that one cell, and the whole pack works again. But here's the part that usually gets missed. Nothing on the battery label tells you this. There's no indicator showing which cells are healthy and which have failed. There's no gauge that distinguishes between genuinely worn out and temporarily depleted. There's no clear signal that helps you make an informed decision. The label tells you what the battery is supposed to do when new. It doesn't tell you what it's actually doing now, and that gap between what you're told and what you need to know is where billions of dollars in unnecessary replacements happen every year. Now, most people never think about this. They assume that if a battery isn't working, the reason doesn't matter. Dead is dead, but that assumption costs you. Let me give you an example. A colleague had a laptop that would only run for about 15 minutes unplugged. He assumed the battery was dying and started shopping for a replacement. The cheapest option he found was $90 before he bought it. I asked him to test something. I had him fully charge the laptop, then run it on battery while monitoring which programs were using the most power. Turned out, a background process was consuming massive amounts of energy. Once he disabled it, the battery life jumped to over 3 hours. The battery wasn't failing. It was being drained faster than it should have been. But if he'd relied only on the battery's behavior, it dies quickly. He would have replaced it unnecessarily. Because the symptom looked like battery failure, even though the cause was something else entirely. This is where confusion starts. Because batteries don't fail in just one way. They can lose capacity gradually. They can develop internal resistance. They can go into protective modes that make them seem dead when they're not. They can be drained by external factors that have nothing to do with the cells themselves. But most people only know one diagnostic. Does it work or doesn't it? And that binary thinking leads to binary decisions. It works. Keep it. It doesn't work. Replace it. But reality isn't binary. There's a whole spectrum between perfect and trash. And most batteries that get replaced fall somewhere in that middle range, functional enough to be useful, but not performing well enough to seem worth keeping. If you knew how to assess where a battery actually falls on that spectrum, you'd make different choices. You'd know when a battery can be brought back with a few charge cycles. You'd know when it's worth replacing a single failed cell instead of the whole pack. You'd know when the issue isn't the battery at all, but something draining it too quickly. But that knowledge isn't handed to you. You have to seek it out, and most people don't, because they've been conditioned to believe that battery assessment requires specialized equipment or technical expertise. But here's the truth. Most battery assessment can be done with nothing more than observation and basic testing. You don't need a multimeter to know if a battery charges and holds that charge. You don't need diagnostic software to see if a device runs longer after you close power-hungry programs. You don't need professional tools to notice if a battery pack is swollen or damaged. What you need is a framework, a way of thinking about batteries that goes beyond working or broken. And once you have that framework, labels stop mattering as much because you're no longer relying on manufacturers to tell you what's happening. You're observing it yourself. Let me give you one more example. A friend brought me a cordless drill that wouldn't hold a charge. The battery pack was original to the tool, about 5 years old. She was ready to buy a new drill, but I asked her to let me test the battery first. I opened the pack. Inside were standard cells. I tested each one individually. 4 were fine. 1 had failed completely. I replaced that 1 cell. Total cost, about $9. The drill worked like new. She's still using it, but here's what struck her. I had no idea batteries were even made of separate cells. I thought it was just one piece. And that's the gap. That's the information asymmetry that keeps people buying new instead of fixing what they have. Because when you don't know how something works, you can't make informed decisions about it. You're entirely dependent on what others tell you. And what they tell you is often shaped by what's profitable for them, not what's useful for you. So what's the alternative? Learn the basics. Not because you need to become a technician, but because understanding fundamentals gives you power. When you know that batteries are made of cells, you know to check if one cell is dragging down the pack. When you know that batteries can enter dormant states, you know to try reconditioning before replacing. When you know that external drains can mimic battery failure, you know to check your usage patterns first. None of this is complicated. It's just information that usually gets left out. And once you have it, you stop being at the mercy of labels that tell you everything except what you actually need to know.